Hello, and welcome to this week's first Learning at Work Week's LinkedIn Live with 1080. So today, Russ Hartland-Shaw will be talking to us about the future of impact, presence, and visibility. So we hope you learn lots about the session. Over to you, Russ.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So thanks very much. My name is Russ Hartland-Shaw, as Hannah said, and I'm delighted to be taking you through this session on the future of impact, presence, and visibility. So I'm a leadership and career coach for 1080, and I've coached many people on their careers at all levels, whether that's navigating kind of transitions from role to role or dealing with more sort of general career mapping. And one of the things I love talking about is impact, presence, and visibility, because it's a topic that we all assume that we know everything about, but when you actually go into the detail and take a moment to look at it, we realize there's actually much we can do to influence what is already. So we talk about kind of creating the right impression. So you'll make the right impression. First impressions matter. They're all phrases that we've grown up with in our childhoods at some point in our life, right? So whether it's going to a friend's house the first time or going for that new job or whatever it might be, the thing is, whoever told you that first impressions matter were absolutely bang on. First impressions really count, and they always have, and yet many of us don't have much in the way of focus around what it actually looks like. So what if I said now that more than ever before, first impressions matter like they have never mattered before? So your impact, presence, and visibility is under threat in a way that we've never seen. We've all heard the news talking about artificial intelligence and how human beings are faced with one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. And that's the introduction and advances in artificial intelligence. And if Elon Musk is calling for regulation in this area, it really must be serious. Artificial intelligence advances are seeing the potential for humans to be replaced by much more effective knowledge banks, and that's robots, effectively. And yet this is where we have the advantage, certainly for now anyway. The one thing that a robot cannot offer is a human soul. It can't offer empathy and human connection. And it's here where we have to ensure that our impact, our presence, and our visibility is better and more polished than ever before. So it's our impact, our presence, and our visibility that's going to help us navigate all of the algorithms that already exist, but many more that are going to follow in the corporate world when it comes to those recruitment portals. Artificial interventions in the future, provided we're in front of the right people, making the right impression, is how we're going to get past them. So I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour talking you through some of the key points that I believe we should be doing when it looks at improving what our impact, our presence, and visibility should be. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of what the difference between the three are. And actually, like I said before, it's sort of the subject that we don't really pay much attention to, but effectively impact is the impression that you leave on other people, how you make other people feel. What's that initial approach when you meet somebody? What's the salutation that you provide? Is it a handshake? Is it an embrace? And is it appropriate? What do you look like? And are you culturally appropriate to the environment that you're in? And when we talk about presence, this is more around the interactions and the engagement that you have over a period of time on other people. So do people notice when you walk into a room, and what's the impression that you leave with them when you leave that room? And then visibility, this is kind of a wider profile that you have on others. So what's the message that you're leaving in your wake? And what are things like your social media, what does it say about you? What's the one thing that people will remember of you once you've left them? And it's all about how you communicate and whether that's appropriate. So when we're thinking about these three things, in order to fully understand it, you need to look at something that I talk about quite a lot, which is your personal brand. So you may well already have an awareness of what your personal brand is. And if that's the case, then that's brilliant. But the reality is that your personal brand is out there, whether you mean for it to be or otherwise. So it's really important that we take a look at that to make sure that it is appropriate. And in order to do that, there are some key questions that I believe you should be asking. So things like, who am I? What am I about? What drives me? What do I actually want in life? How do I get there? And why am I unique? And how do I communicate my essence and brand? What is it that I want to be famous for or known for? Questions that we kind of have never really had the time to ask ourselves because we'll get so caught up in our daily lives. But if you sit for a moment and answer these questions, it will really give you a great understanding as to what it is that your personal brand is and what you're portraying to the outside world. So I wanted to sort of pause for a second and look at this slide, which is a pretty busy slide, to be fair, and it forms part of another presentation that I do on personal brand, but it's a good one to share with you because it effectively talks about 3 key areas at the very bottom. So these 3 areas are what I'm going to take you through in more detail around personal values, career engagers, and skills and motivators. And essentially what I'm saying is if you can be fully aware of what your personal values are, your career engagers, and your skills and motivators are, that gives you a really good foundation for what your personal brand will look like. So the first thing is around knowing yourself. So again, this may seem reasonably obvious, but ask yourself the question, what is your value set? And if you're sat there thinking, I have no idea, that's okay, because not many people really spend the time to think about it, but you may well live and breathe your values, but you may not be fully aware of what they are. So taking some time to really understand what your values are is really, really important. And so your values they're set in stone, and they're sort of set in stone in your earliest formative years, really, and they're what shape you as an individual, and they're effectively what makes you tick. So if you think about what is an absolute non-negotiable for you, so for example, for me, it's something like integrity. If somebody ever questions my integrity, it really, really hurts. That's a core value that I have created, and that you will have this. And then it's asking yourself questions like, why are they important? What is it about these personal values that are so incredibly special? So effectively, what are personal values? It's the number one derailer that will absolutely throw you off balance if they're questions. It's what makes you really authentic. So you can ask. So you need to ask the question: what do you do in a real and meaningful way that makes you tick? And a great way to look at this now, I would love to be able to share this with you, but if you take a look online at personal values, there'll be lots of these around there for you to look at. But essentially, if you take these cards and have a look at them and decide like the top 10 of these that you would choose to be a personal value, the idea is that you take these 10, put them up around the house, and really, really give them some thought as to whether they are relevant to you. And then the idea being then is that you reduce them to your top 5. Now, this isn't an exercise that will take 5 minutes. It's something that you possibly need to revisit for a few days, but eventually you'll come up with a core set of values that you can absolutely live and breathe by. And again, they may well be already something that you know about, but it's always good to take a look. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the middle part of the pyramid in the earlier slide, which is around your career engagers. So this is a little bit different to your personal values. So your career engagers are effectively what get you up out of bed in the morning to go and do the job that you want to do. So the idea being, unlike your personal values, these do tend to change. So for example, if you'd asked me 10 years ago kind of what my career engagers would have been, it would have been all about progression and money and remuneration and global travel. For 2 small children, it's absolutely not what my career engagers are, and what I want is work-life balance and purpose. So these career engagers do tend to change and shift, but it's really important that you take a look to see what they are. And what's really good about this as well is that if you look up and work out what your career engagers are, it's very, very good idea to plot that against your current role that you're doing to see whether or not that is whether you're playing to your career engagers. And if you're not, then it'll probably give you some questions to answer later on. The other point to remember with career engagers is that if for whatever reason you may be in a role or you're doing something where there is a key part of your career engagers just not being met, such as being involved, for example, you may find yourself in a more of a lone position, but you need involvement. You can actually get this energy from somewhere else. So this would be where you would probably actively go out and search for being involved in other groups that might be outside of work. So understanding what your career engages is a really important thing to developing what your personal brand is. So your impact, presence, and visibility is essentially what others see. And as I said before, it's out there. People have got a view of you, and how aware are you of this? If you take a moment to think about what would people be saying about you right now, and do you even know the answer to that? And if you don't, then I suggest you go out and find out, because it could be really positive, or it might be it might not be so positive. And if it's not, you've kind of got to ask the questions as to what you want to do to change that. All of this is shaped by the impact, the presence, and the visibility of what you're having on the outside world. So a good way of kind of understanding, I guess, what that is to ask the question. And there's a great tool out there called the Johari window, which you may or may not have heard of. And again, if you go out online, you'll see this is a really, really good model to understand kind of what people think of you, essentially. So it's a very simple 4-box grid, and it is made up, I'll show you the other slide as well, it's made of a number of descriptors here. And the idea is that you take these descriptors and you plot them on this grid, but you only use your top, I would say top 6 at the most. So you take your descriptors and you put them on this grid. And then the other thing you then need to do is take these descriptors and send it out to some key people in your life. So the brave with it among us will do this with people that we're not so sure about, that we're actually not convinced that we necessarily know what they think about us, because that's when you're going to get proper, true insights. And the idea is you give them the same descriptors and they provide you with their 6, and then you come and plot them onto this grid. So known to self and known to others should be reasonably straightforward, but the really important one is this blind area here. So if, for example, you send this out to 5 people and you yourself think that you're accepting, adaptable, and bold, however, what you also find out is that other people think that you might be quite shy, tense, responsive. What this does is provide you with what you're putting out there to the outside world, and that might not be something that you necessarily agree with, but when it's there in black and white, it's something that you can do something about. So this Johari window is an excellent tool to really start to understand what the impact, the presence, and the visibility is that you're looking at. So as I said before, first impressions really matter, and they matter more than they've ever mattered before. And what I wanted to do for you, another tool that I use with people, and this is your brand review. So again, if you take a look at this grid and understand from these points here, whether you believe it would be a liability, below average, on par with peers, above average, or first rate. And what this also does is provide you with a better understanding as to kind of what you think your impact is. And actually, if you're feeling really brave, you could ask some trusted advisors this as well and ask them to be really honest with you as to what they think. And it's just all different tools to be able to really understand what your impact, your presence, and your visibility is. So I just wanted to touch on social media as well, because this is something that's really important, because it's sort of an added arm to your certainly your visibility. And kind of you need to understand for a start how engaged in social media that you are generally, and whether each page that you have out there is appropriate to the desired audience. And I think my advice to people with this is that if you're not that engaged in social media, don't force it. Don't force the issue if it's something that's just not something that you're about. But what I would say, if you're looking around your impact, your presence, and your visibility, it's probably prudent to have some sort of bare minimum standards in place when it comes to LinkedIn, certainly in the professional world. And so as a minimum, I would be recommended that people have an up-to-date page, which matching and relevant information that aligns with any sort of resume or CV that might be out there, with an up-to-date and appropriate photograph. And then if you're looking to activate your page more, one of the things I say is sort of maintaining your inbox and invites list is critical, and making sure that you like and share pages. But what it isn't is about putting you under yourself under pressure to post things for the sake of it. And always remembering, of course, that don't feel you have to behave how everyone else is behaving, because that's not what this is about, in my view. It's all about, in order to be authentic, do what's right for you, but putting these minimum standards in place is probably worth it. So once you've got a better understanding of what your personal brand might look like, having done all of the exercises that we talked about and got the feedback from others, one thing that we talk about is understanding what a brand pitch might look like. So that might be something that is a 3-line sentence that you would be able to talk to people in a networking event about, people that you've met for the first time. And I've been asked before to provide some examples. So things such as, very punchy, I'm a business coach who's passionate about helping others and realizing their full potential, or talking about my values, loyal, authentic, and full of integrity. In the moment, try to see failure as an opportunity for growth. Really having to think about what it is in one sentence that describes you. That is what a brand pitch is. So when you tie it all together and you think about your brand pitch, and how this is connected to your impact, your presence, and your visibility, you need to sort of think about the following. So when it comes to impact, it's how you introduce yourself to others. How strong is your handshake, and do you look the part, and in terms of the image that you're trying to portray. When it comes to presence, like, how does this look on an ongoing basis? Are you making a one-time effort, or is this really what you're about? Are you being authentic, and therefore is what you're trying to create sustainable, which is kind of my point earlier around social media. It's all about sustainability. And then when you look at visibility when it comes to a brand pitch, it's like, does your LinkedIn page match the identity that you're trying to put out there? Are all of the social media platforms appropriate or locked to relevant audiences? And how strong is your communication style? And what does it look like? What is it you want to be famous for? So as I mentioned earlier, it's all about overcoming the robot, right? So having an improved awareness of your impact, your presence, and your visibility is going to allow you to connect to the human being behind the artificial intelligence. So it's all about increasing those touch points with those humans. So if you take looking for a new role as an example, the people that think that just by trawling the internet and trawling LinkedIn and applying for jobs online and expecting to be successful in that, on its own, is just simply not the way to be. If you want to really be successful at finding a role, it's all about the wider network that you've got, putting the work in, speaking to the people, putting your name out there in other ways in order to strengthen your ability to get those roles. There are so many different areas to look at that over and above just applying online, because the thing is with these algorithms is the applicant tracking systems are there to do exactly that. But what it doesn't do is show people's personalities. And as best you possibly can, trying to get your personality across on a CV is one thing. But if you're able to influence the human beings that are behind the artificial intelligence, at whatever point that might be, so being in the same room as the talent team that are recruiting for a role, so that when your name goes through that recruitment portal, it's recognized by somebody and it's recognized in a favorable way, is kind of how you're going to get across and through these algorithms and get the better of the artificial intelligence. So when I look at in summary, we've discussed the importance of the impression that you make in the wake of increased use of artificial, which is only going to get more and more significant as the years go by. We've looked at the difference between impact, presence, and visibility, and how you can affect that. We've gained an understanding of what our personal brand is and its impact on others. We've looked at our personal values, and we've looked at our career engagers and what they are, and we've looked at understanding ourselves better and how we can affect our impact, presence, and visibility. We've also explored some tools that we can do that, and I appreciate that I'm not able to share them with you, but it would be really, really useful if you went out and looked at the Johari window and the brand review document and the personal values exercise, and really spend some time understanding those 3 key areas of that pyramid that I showed you earlier, to sort of really galvanize what it is that you're about and what it is that you're what the message that you're trying to portray out there in the wider world. And I've introduced you to something called the personal brand pitch, which we've probably all got an awareness of, but just giving these things a bit of time is really going to be what's needed to properly get ahead of the artificial intelligence wave that's coming. So I want to sort of pause there and thank you, really. And I wondered if, Hannah, there were any questions in the chat.
Yes, so we've got a couple of questions actually, Russ. So the first one makes reference to if you've got or had a negative first impression with someone, what can you do to change that?
That's a really interesting one. And I think it's very specific to the individual. I will always say that you need to be your authentic self. So if you feel you have made a negative impression, well, firstly, before you even think that, I'd like you to understand whether or not it's fact or assumption. That's something that so have you really made a negative impression, would be what I'd say, because you probably made it worse in your head and you've come away and had that kind of awful kind of retrospective thinking. I will always say try and get perspective on the situation. But I think if you think that there's a problem, call it out and be honest with somebody and say, look, I don't feel like we set off on the right foot there, and I'd like to start afresh, because what that does is demonstrate your values right there and then, and actually you're just being honest. But I would really counsel that what you think is the reality might be different. Sorry, what you think is going on might be very different to the reality. It probably isn't as bad as you think it is.
I agree. I think it's really important, this piece, to be able to say, look, I think we did get off the wrong foot. I think we've all been in meetings where, potentially you get there, things are already slightly heated, you haven't had that time to decompress, but actually saying, let me stop and say, this is not how I want to be seen, is a real, show of who you are and the fact that you can reflect on that.
Mm-hmm. There's a big thing about taking a deep breath as well, and we talk about that an awful lot with certainly with our children. Take a deep breath, it's all right, relax, calm down. However, there's science behind the fact that neurologically taking a deep breath resets you, it creates all the right conditions to really calm, and actually it's really important that when you're in that heated environment, it's good to just sit there and reflect and take a minute, and taking a deep breath certainly helps that.
Agreed. So Russ, we have another question from Michael. Can you go further in the advice you would give to overcome AI in the recruitment process to ensure the prospective employer really understands your personal brand? And we know this is coming up more and more, with AI almost being able to rule you out because you haven't got that human contact. So what is it you think we need to be doing to overcome that?
Oh, sorry, you froze then for a minute. So can we go further into the advice for overcoming the AI in the recruitment process? So I mentioned earlier about applicant tracking systems, and I think that's probably the one thing I would talk about when you're going through these large sort of algorithms, and you're having that awareness that they're there, really. So what an applicant tracking system does is it tracks for keywords and key statements that it's looking for, and it will pull out those words or statements in any kind of communication that you put through the online portal that you're completing, and that's probably one of the key ways I would say to try and overcome those recruitment processes. I don't know whether you've got anything to add on that.
So I think one of the other things is actually you have to put your application down that process, but go and find who is the contact for that. Go and find if you've got anyone in your network who could contact. So almost you can have that human contact in a different way. So fundamentally, it's getting your brand across, as well as using the AI. The other thing, like you say, I think it's really important to pick out those keywords and have them in your pitch, both verbally, but also in your profile on your CV, so the system knows to push you forward.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note as well. I will always say, like create a CV, and if you are looking for a new role in particular, like create that CV 6 months before. It needs to be an ongoing document, like how many people I've spoken to where they're in a position where they're looking for a new role, and there's this Herculean task. They've got to complete a CV, because the last one they did was like a decade ago. It shouldn't really be that. You should always be updating it. And I always sort of talk about journaling and making sure that all like your key achievements are in there. But the only way to get those key achievements is to write stuff down as you're doing it, rather than trying to sit there and stress trying to find all your key achievements over the last decade. And I always sort of say, like, get one master copy of your CV. And then, to your point earlier around how to overcome that the AI recruitment process, is those keywords that are linked to the job description in a specific CV that's related to that role is what is the other thing I would say. But I think as that question talks about as well more broadly, and as we talked about in the deck, it is so much more than just shoving a CV through an online recruitment portal. It's much wider than that. Where's your network, as you said, Hannah? Like, where are these key people? Be really brave and go out there and literally connect with people in the organization that you're trying to get a role in. You know, going on LinkedIn and being really brave and just saying, like, I'm really excited to get the opportunity. I'd love to understand more about the role.
Absolutely.
And that's how it's just getting your name across there, other than just the online portal. And I think if you're doing that internally as well, what's really important is when you've got those talent reviews going on, and you know, your line manager or your line manager's line manager and HR are all around a room talking about talent and who's in the business that wants to move on and who wants to move across and all the rest of it. You've got one champion is great in your line manager. Your line manager knows where you want to be, but how do you connect with those other people that you may not necessarily even know? Like, so you might not have any day-to-day operating with the head of HR, but how do, on the very, you know, at the very minimum, how do you get them to at least know who you are and know, like, what, oh, I've had an interaction with that person, and it might have been a very sort of strategic move to have a conversation in the coffee queue, maybe. It's just really making sure that you've got as many people on your bench championing you as possible, so that you can get through the AI systems. Agreed.
And Michael said the same around using your network. I have one last question for you. So, and it goes back to the Johari windows. So one of the things when I did that, I went out to people within my network to discuss what they saw. They made a comment in something that I saw, I think it sits in their blind, is that I'm brave. Now, I don't see myself as brave. In fact, I can get quite anxious, particularly when I'm worried about things, etc. So I feel I'm not. But I then took that feedback on board. In terms of impact and being your authentic self, do you think you need to play into those skills when people notice things in you that you haven't? Or do you think you just let them play out?
I think when you get a blind list of things, so it depends whether it's a positive or a negative, for one. That's what I will say. But if there's something in there that you think, oh, wow, okay, I'm brave, I think it's important to try and notice that's how others are viewing you. Mm-hmm. Because you can't argue with what other people are saying, really. Whatever you think inside, that's what people believe. So one thing I would say with that is to try and understand, okay, can you give me some examples? Like, what does that look like? When have you seen me be brave? Because I'm really interested to understand that, because I don't see myself as brave. And trying to elaborate on that a little bit more. And I think that's often when we get things like 360 feedback and you get all these comments as well, and people are like, oh, well, I don't know. It generates a great opportunity for a discussion, I think, these types of things. So Agreed. Either that's positive or negative. If it's negative, try not to be protective and oppositional about that, because ultimately you can't change what someone thinks about you, but you can sort of change how you behave in order to change that, if that makes sense. Yeah. But if it's something that you want to sort of change, so if you do want to actively be braver, then that's a great place to be, because you're putting that image out there. Okay, thank you. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. So I want to say thank you, Russ, for your time today and for a great session. I just want to remind everyone before the end of this session that we've got another session on Thursday at 10:30 with Liz Osland on creativity and the future of work. So we very much hope you enjoy Learning at Work Week, and you've enjoyed our session today. Thank you again, Russ. And thank you for listening, everyone.